September 17th, 1944, 1 p.m. British paratroopers of the 1st Airborne Division land 13 kilometers north of their primary objective, the road bridge at Arnhem, Netherlands. The distance represents a critical decision made 72 hours earlier that guarantees operational failure. Brigadier General James Gavin, commanding the American 82nd Airborne, calls the landing zone selection the single biggest mistake of Market Garden. Within 48 hours, this decision transforms a daring strategic gamble into a catastrophic tactical disaster. Major General Roy Urquhart, 43 years old, commands the British 1st Airborne Division. A veteran infantry officer who fought in North Africa and Sicily, he's never commanded airborne forces before this operation. Methodical and pragmatic, he argues forcefully against the distant drop zones, but gets overruled by RAF commanders who refuse to fly transport aircraft near the bridge due to feared anti-aircraft fire. The compromise puts 10,000 elite paratroopers in a position where reaching their objective requires a multi-hour march through German-held territory. By September 19th, only 740 men reach the bridge. The rest never arrive. August 1944. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery proposes Operation Market Garden, an audacious plan to end the war by Christmas. The operation combines the largest airborne assault in history, Market, with an armored thrust by XXX Corps, Garden. 3 Allied airborne divisions will seize bridges across the Rhine Delta in the Netherlands, creating a corridor for XXX Corps tanks to drive 100 kilometers into Germany's industrial Ruhr region. Success requires capturing and holding 8 major bridges simultaneously. The final objective, the road bridge at Arnhem. Lieutenant General Frederick Browning, 47 years old, commands the Allied Airborne Corps. A dashing, aristocratic officer who pioneered British airborne forces in 1941. He believes in aggressive action and accepts considerable risk. Confident in his paratrooper superiority, he dismisses warnings about German strength in the Arnhem area. When asked about the operation's ambitious timeline, Browning famously remarks, "We might be going a bridge too far." He approves the plan anyway, including the controversial drop zone selections that prioritize RAF safety over tactical advantage. The planning reveals fundamental tensions between airborne and Air Force commanders. Major General Paul Williams, commanding the 9-Troop Carrier Command, insists his transport aircraft cannot land paratroopers within 3 kilometers of the Arnhem Bridge. RAF intelligence identifies 60 anti-aircraft guns in the immediate bridge area. Williams argues that acceptable losses require landing zones beyond effective AA range. Urquhart protests that distant drops sacrifice surprise and tactical concentration. The compromise places British paratroopers 8 to 13 kilometers from their objective, distances that require hours to traverse on foot through Dutch countryside. Around 3 o'clock, intelligence warnings emerge that Allied commanders choose to ignore. RAF photo reconnaissance on September 12 shows German armor in woods 15 kilometers north of Arnhem. The photographs reveal tanks, half-tracks, and organized defensive positions. Dutch resistance contacts report SS Panzer divisions refitting near Arnhem, specifically the 9th SS Panzer Division Hohenstaufen and 10th SS Panzer Division Frundsberg. Major Brian Urquhart, no relation to the general, British Airborne Corps intelligence officer, shows the photographs to Browning and argues for postponing Market Garden. Browning dismisses the concerns, stating the tanks are probably not serviceable, and removes Major Urquhart from duty for exhaustion. The intelligence is accurate. 2 SS Panzer divisions totaling 6,000 troops, with 50 tanks sit directly in the British landing zones. September 17th, 1944, 1 p.m. The first lift of British 1st Airborne Division drops near Arnhem in perfect weather. Of the division's 3 parachute brigades, only one, Brigadier Gerald Lathbury's 1st Parachute Brigade, has the immediate mission to seize the bridge. The other 2 brigades, plus divisional troops, must first secure the landing zones for subsequent lifts arriving on September 18th and 19th. This phased deployment, dictated by transport aircraft shortages, means Lathbury's 2,000 men march toward the bridge while 8,000 others remain behind. The operational plan violates basic airborne principles. Concentrate force at the objective. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, 31 years old, commands 2nd Parachute Battalion within Lathbury's brigade. The veteran of the Bruneival raid in Tunisia, he's aggressive, experienced, and skeptical of the plan's feasibility. His battalion takes the southern route toward Arnhem along the Rhine riverbank, the longest approach, but offering cover. 2 other battalions take northern routes. At 3:30 p.m., Frost's 740 men depart the landing zone on foot, carrying only light weapons and 3-day supplies. The 13-kilometer march to the bridge begins smoothly. No German opposition materializes initially. This absence of resistance proves misleading. What British commanders don't know transforms the operation catastrophically. SS Sturmbannführer Sepp Kraft commands a training battalion of 300 SS troops positioned exactly between the British landing zones and Arnhem. At 1:45 p.m., 45 minutes after the first British paratroopers land, Kraft deploys his battalion to block the northern approach routes into Arnhem. The speed of this German response shocks British intelligence assumptions. Additionally, SS Gruppenführer Wilhelm Bittrich, commanding the 2 SS Panzer Corps, observes the British landings from his headquarters 15 kilometers away. By 2:30 p.m., Bittrich orders both SS Panzer divisions to deploy, 9th SS Panzer to defend Arnhem, 10th SS Panzer to move south toward Nijmegen. German reaction time measures in hours, not days as British planning assumed. Around 6 o'clock, while British paratroopers struggle toward their objective, a shocking parallel event unfolds on the German side. SS Hauptsturmführer Victor Grabner, commanding 9th SS Panzer's reconnaissance battalion, drives his entire unit, 40 armored vehicles including tanks and half-tracks, directly into Arnhem to reinforce the bridge defenses. At 5 p.m. on September 17th, just 4 hours after British landings, German armor reaches the bridge before most British paratroopers do. The race for the bridge, which British planning assumed they would win easily, turns into a near-run contest decided by minutes. September 17th, 8 p.m. Frost's battalion reaches the northern end of Arnhem Bridge and occupies buildings overlooking the approaches. They're the only British unit to reach the objective. The 2 other battalions taking northern routes run into Kraft's defensive positions and become pinned down in fierce firefights. By nightfall, these battalions sit 5 kilometers from the bridge, unable to advance. The distant landing zones, chosen to avoid anti-aircraft fire, fragment British forces across 15 kilometers of Dutch countryside. Frost's 740 men hold the bridge in isolation, waiting for reinforcements that cannot reach them. September 18th brings no improvement. The second lift of British paratroopers arrives at 10 a.m., the same distant landing zones 13 kilometers from the bridge. Instead of reinforcing Frost immediately, these fresh troops must fight through the expanding German defensive ring that now encircles Arnhem's western approaches. Major General Urquhart, attempting to reach his forward battalions, becomes trapped behind German lines and spends 36 hours hiding in a Dutch attic, completely out of communication with his division. British command and control disintegrates within 24 hours of landing. The radio communications failure compounds the disaster. British Army No. 22 radio sets, designed for ranges up to 5 kilometers, cannot transmit the 13 kilometers from landing zones to Frost's position at the bridge. The distances imposed by drop zone selection defeat the communications plan entirely. Frost cannot report his situation. Divisional headquarters cannot coordinate battalion movements. When RAF transport aircraft arrive with resupply drops, they cannot receive ground signals indicating friendly positions. Supply containers land in German-held areas. By September 18th evening, British troops at the bridge run low on ammunition, medical supplies, and have no communication with higher command. Around 9 o'clock, the situation escalates dramatically as XXX Corps advance stalls. The armoured column, racing up a single elevated highway through flat Dutch polderland, faces determined German resistance at every bridge and village. Irish Guards leading the advance sustain 20 tank losses in the first 15 kilometres. The Garden portion of Market Garden, intended to reach Arnhem within 48 hours, remains 80 kilometres away when the critical period expires. The single road axis of advance, identified as a vulnerability during planning, proves catastrophic. German forces need only block the road at one point to halt the entire corps. They block it at multiple points. September 19th, 9 a.m. German forces isolate Frost's battalion at the bridge completely. SS Sturmbannführer Grabner attempts to rush across the bridge with his armoured reconnaissance battalion, 40 vehicles carrying 200 SS troops. British paratroopers, positioned in buildings overlooking both approaches, open fire with PIAT anti-tank weapons, machine guns, and rifles. Within 30 minutes, they destroy 12 German half-tracks and armoured cars, kill 70 SS troops including Grabner himself, and block the bridge completely with burning vehicles. The defence demonstrates what concentrated British airborne forces can accomplish. But Frost's 740 men represent only 7% of the division. The other 93% cannot reach them due to the initial drop zone decision. German reinforcements pour into Arnhem faster than British intelligence considered possible. The 9th SS Panzer Division, supposedly not serviceable, deploys 40 operational tanks, 30 half-tracks, and 4,000 troops. These forces establish a defensive ring around Arnhem's western approaches, blocking British reinforcement attempts. Every British attempt to break through to the bridge fails with heavy casualties. The 2nd South Staffordshire Battalion loses 500 of 600 men trying to fight through 4 kilometres of German defences. The distances that seemed manageable during planning prove insurmountable in combat against armoured opposition. Around 12 o'clock, multiple catastrophic factors converge simultaneously. XXX Corps remains 50 kilometres south, stalled at Nijmegen where German forces still hold the bridge. The Polish 1st Parachute Brigade, scheduled to drop south of the Arnhem Bridge on September 19th, gets delayed 24 hours by weather. Frost's battalion, now surrounded at the bridge, fights its third day without reinforcement, resupply, or relief. German forces bring up artillery, mortars, and tanks to systematically destroy the buildings Frost's men occupy. The British paratroopers, armed with light weapons designed for rapid assault, face siege warfare they cannot win. September 20th marks the operation's effective failure. German forces compress the isolated British units into a shrinking perimeter in Oosterbeek, 8 kilometres west of the bridge they were sent to capture. Frost's battalion, reduced to 200 able-bodied men, ammunition exhausted, most wounded, faces German tanks firing at point-blank range into their positions. At 9 a.m., Frost, severely wounded by mortar fragments, authorises his battalion's surrender. The bridge falls to German control. The 48 hours that matter, September 17th to 19th, demonstrates how tactical errors compound into strategic failure. The distant landing zones give Germans time to organize, time to reinforce, time to isolate British forces before they concentrate. The mathematical reality condemns the plan retroactively. British paratroopers require approximately 3 hours to march 13th kilometres carrying combat loads. German forces require approximately 2 hours to deploy from their positions 15 kilometers away via motorized transport. The British accept a 13-kilometer foot march while facing an enemy with motorized mobility. The fundamental equation guarantees German forces win the race for positional advantage. Planning documents show Urquhart identified this problem before the operation, calculating his battalions needed at least 4 hours to reach the bridge from the assigned drop zones. Events prove his calculations conservative. Most units never reach it at all. British tactical doctrine for airborne operations, developed through 1942-1944. Experience emphasizes landing directly on objectives or within 1 kilometer maximum. Market Garden violates this doctrine completely, influenced by RAF concerns about aircraft losses. The compromise prioritizes transport aircraft safety over mission success. Post-war analysis by British Airborne Forces staff calculates that landing within 3 kilometers of the bridge accepting higher aircraft losses would have put 3,000 troops at the objective within 1 hour, overwhelming German response capability. Instead, landing 13 kilometers away disperses 10,000 troops across countryside where they defeat themselves through isolation. The post-battle analysis reveals how one decision, dividing forces into 3 routes, cascaded into catastrophe when combined with multiple failures. Had all 3 battalions taken Frost's Riverside route, 2,004 men would have reached the bridge together instead of 740. This concentrated force could have established a defensive perimeter strong enough to withstand German counterattacks for the required 48 hours. Even if XXX Corps was delayed, 2,000 paratroopers with combined ammunition supplies might have held for 4 or 5 days, potentially allowing the ground forces to arrive. The radio failures proved more devastating than anyone anticipated. British No. 22 radio sets, effective in open terrain, could not penetrate buildings or cope with urban electromagnetic interference. This meant battalion commanders couldn't coordinate movements, headquarters couldn't assess situations, and forward units couldn't call for artillery support or resupply. German forces, using more powerful Funkerat sets, maintained communication throughout the battle. This asymmetry gave Germans decisive advantage. They could concentrate forces where British were weakest because they knew where everyone was located. Intelligence failures receive harsh criticism. 2 days before the operation, Dutch resistance reports German tanks near Arnhem. These reports reach Allied headquarters, but are dismissed as exaggerated. Aerial photographs clearly show tank tracks and vehicle concentrations. But intelligence officers interpret them as defeated remnants rather than combat-ready units. The presence of Model's headquarters just 2 miles from British drop zones, a fact known to Allied intelligence, triggers no alarm. Post-war investigations conclude that senior officers wanted Market Garden to succeed so badly they unconsciously dismissed contradictory evidence. Montgomery's planning receives particular scrutiny. The Field Marshal designed Market Garden as a single-thrust operation along one highway, creating a 64-mile-long column vulnerable to German counterattacks on its flanks. British military doctrine traditionally emphasizes broad-front advances with mutual support. But Montgomery abandons this principle for speed. His insistence on 48-hour timelines ignores the realities of combat, that defenders always slow attackers, that bridges take time to secure, that unexpected resistance causes delays. The entire operation rests on perfect execution, leaving no margin for friction. Yet individual courage under impossible circumstances defines Arnhem. Frost's battalion holds the bridge for 54 hours against overwhelming force, inflicting disproportionate casualties on veteran SS troops. Their stand prevents German armor from crossing north for 2 full days, disrupting enemy plans and protecting other Allied units. The paratroopers at Oosterbeek fight for 9 days encircled, with limited ammunition and no hope of reinforcement. Dutch civilians risk death to shelter wounded British soldiers. The battle produces 5 Victoria Crosses, Britain's highest award for valour, and countless acts of heroism by ordinary soldiers who simply refuse to quit. Return to that September 17th afternoon, watching transport aircraft release paratroopers into clear Dutch skies. The operation begins with optimism born of D-Day success and German retreat across France. Everyone believes the Wehrmacht is beaten, that one bold stroke can end the war. The British 1st Airborne Division lands expecting 48 hours of fighting before tanks arrive. They get 9 days of desperate combat followed by evacuation or captivity. The difference between expectations and reality teaches a lesson that military planners study 80 years later. Operation Market Garden's failure extends the war and causes immense Dutch suffering. German forces flood dikes, deliberately drowning Dutch farmland to create defensive barriers. They evacuate Arnhem's civilian population and loot the abandoned city. The winter of 1944. -45 brings famine to Western Netherlands, the hunger winter that kills 22,000 Dutch civilians. Rotterdam and Amsterdam remain under German occupation until May 1945. The Rhine crossing that should have occurred in September 1944 finally succeeds in March 1945 at Remagen, 6 months late and hundreds of miles south of Arnhem. The British 1st Airborne Division never recovers. Its survivors spend the remainder of the war in German POW camps or reassigned to other units. The division is officially disbanded in November 1945. Arnhem Bridge, renamed John Frost Bridge in 1977, stands as memorial to the paratroopers who held it against impossible odds. The battle enters military legend as the Bridge Too Far, from Cornelius Rhines 1974 book and the 1977 film. But the real lesson isn't about distance, it's about how small decisions, when circumstances align against them, determine whether brave men die in victory or defeat. At Arnhem, they died holding a bridge that should have shortened the war, but instead became a symbol of courage wasted by flawed planning.